Well, going by real-world standards, it's difficult to say, since obviously this isn't the world of Five Nights at Freddy's, and I wasn't alive in the 80s when the original killings take place. However, if William did not have access to the technology that he does in the games, he would probably have done significantly less damage. Firstly, his children probably wouldn't have perished, since they both died due to animatronics that were way outside the norm. Since, you know, Baby literally scooped Elizabeth using a big claw that was hidden inside her and then kept her inside of a chamber, and Crying Child was killed when Fredbear crushed his skull, which would require an absurd amount of force which would be impossible to realistically find for an animatronic, especially in the 80s, since FNAF 4 does take place in 1983, meaning all three of his kids would be alive, potentially resulting in less of a death toll, since putting Crying Child back together ended up becoming a driving force behind why William continued to kill. Since while the missing children's incident wasn't until 1985 supposedly, Baby was designed to grab kids long before, since Elizabeth's room was empty in FNAF 4, indicating that she was already scooped by Baby, so he would have had to at least have the idea to kill before 1983. Cause you know. We still don't know why he started killing. As for how successful he would be if his kids weren't a driving force, that depends. One of the most well-known serial killers is Ted Bundy, who ended up admitting to 30 killings over the course of 4 years. I'm sure we all know the story of how he used his looks and charisma to win over various victims and society, but I feel like we can kind of compare this to William. He is in essence doing the same thing, using that Bonnie suit to win over his victims and lure them to the back room when he would then take their life. He was also able to avoid the cops despite being arrested, like we learned from the newspaper clippings in FNAF 1, because he was arrested but released due to the bodies never being found, even though animatronics were leaking mucus and blood. So needless to say, while yes, he would be limited with technology, he would still be able to kill, but I guess in the old-fashioned way, which sounds absolutely horrible. However, what would the cops have done? I feel like they wouldn't have been as bad as the cops from the FNAF universe. Like, the cops in our world wouldn't have been as bad, but I mean, I don't really know. Like, the suits ended up leaking mucus and blood, and it was definitely reported to the police. Again, as we see in the newspaper clippings from FNAF 1, the parents who called it in even akin to the animatronics to reanimated carcasses, which, I mean, does make sense given that they were possessed, but even in our world, if someone called that in, I feel like there would be an investigation. And while the animatronics wouldn't have been possessed in our world, since like I've said before, possession isn't real, but if there is an ongoing investigation or even a closed investigation where bodies were not located, and then there are things in the investigated establishment that are leaking blood, I think that calls for the case to be reopened, or at least someone to go check it out. Somehow though, they either didn't investigate or they did but didn't find a body inside the animatronic, which is highly unlikely because, you know, there would still at least be bones, so I'm pretty sure that they just didn't investigate. However, I'd like to think that in our world they would have been investigated and found the bodies, thus resulting in William being arrested, convicted, and only the original 6 victims having died. Nobody else would have died, and William would have been arrested. At least, I think he would. Obviously, I can't predict the jury, and I can't predict how the verdict would have happened, since, you know, Ted Bundy was also arrested, and he had a trial that managed to evade police for ages, so who knows at this point? There we have it, friends. How dangerous would William Afton be? Not as dangerous, hopefully, since he wouldn't have access to the same technology that he would have in his universe, and hopefully our cops would have been more competent. I'm still mad about those. What other questions should I answer, be it FNAF related or gaming related in general? Be sure you let me know down in the comments. I'm definitely thinking maybe something along the lines of why the doors don't work properly. Okay, not really, but like, you have to admit, the doors make no sense. I don't care if you say, oh, it's electromagnets. No, that's not how they work. They require electricity to actually, like, magnetize things, so it would be the opposite. If they had power, the doors would be up. So, like, my point still stands. And then everyone's like, oh, it's for safety so you don't get locked in. That room would have a window. It would have a window out back, so you could escape if there was a fire. I'm pretty sure that's required by law, that there would have to be a window there. So, why don't the doors work? I don't know. Honestly, I can't answer that question because I would just rant the whole time and it would just be a 20-minute video of me ranting. But honestly, It feels like that's something that you guys enjoy because you're still here watching this part, at least I hope, at the very least. The main question we need to ask is what counts as being alive? Because since maybe even the first game, William has been possessed by the one you should not have killed. One of his victims that ends up possessing him rather than an animatronic. So he's survived quite a lot that would have normally killed him. The Oxford Dictionary defines being alive as, quote, living, not dead. Which, I mean, is fairly obvious, but I was hoping for something with a little more meat so that I could maybe find a loophole. But by the dictionary definition of alive, no, William Afton is not alive. We are vividly described his explosive death in The Man in Room 1280, the final story from the 5th Fazbear Frights book Bunny Call. But that's not why you clicked on this video. You clicked so that you could yell at me in the comments saying, of course he's alive. This video is pointless. Why did you do this? So maybe there's a way that I can get this video to 10 minutes after all. I mean, we could consider keeping the memory of someone alive being alive, since after all, Henry does his damnedest to make sure that everyone forgets what William did in the FNAF 6 ending, saying, quote, this place will not be remembered, and the memory of everything that started this can finally begin to fade away, as the agony of any tragedy should. But we know the memory doesn't fade, since even after the simulated pizzeria burns down, Fazbear Entertainment is still kicking and still uses what William did to make profit and even strengthen their brand. Like how hotels will make their entire brand about being haunted if enough people say that it is, like the Queen Mary or even the Farhampton Inn from How I Met Your Mother. They made a whole virtual reality game revolving around William's axe, which features an AI version of him in the form of Springtrap, not even talking about the Spirit Code version of Glitchtrap. And with the special delivery service, they are also actively shipping out recreations of Springtrap to everyone, even going so far as to make alternate versions like Toxic Springtrap, Clown Springtrap, and The Curse, which I have to admit is probably the most fitting name for the Fazbear Entertainment to give this character. But to them, it isn't a character. He's a real person, a real serial killer. That's like shipping out robotic versions of Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy to parents and kids. I say especially him because Clown Springtrap is definitely inspired by John Wayne Gacy, and you know, the similar target of kids. But I mean, like, how incredibly offensive would that be if a company did that in our world? They would be instantly canceled and even investigated to see if that was meant to be a warning or some kind of threat. But from what we know, nothing of the sort has happened to Fazbear Entertainment. And let's be honest, I don't think the Oxford Dictionary takes into account extreme agony possession as a contributing factor when talking about how someone is alive. So does being a sentient AI count as being alive? Well, it depends on the person and their personal definition of being alive. While sentient AI would probably be able to feel and go through some of the living process, such as emotion and whatnot, an AI, sentient or not, has no DNA. It has no cellular structure and doesn't undergo the process of cellular division and replication. It can't heal a wound. I mean, it can't really be damaged. Sentience is the capacity to be aware of feelings and sensations, not to actually be a living organism. Even if they have a body, like one of the animatronics from the games, those aren't alive, despite being aware that they're possessed. Possession isn't living, so no, still, William isn't alive. Now, the really tricky thing to determine is if possessing a living being, as William does with Vanny, would count as being alive. And for this, I feel like we need to look at DID. Dissociative Identity Disorder, formerly known as Multiple Personality Disorder, is a mental health condition. People with DID have 2 or more separate personalities, and these personalities control their behavior at different times. Each identity has its own personal history, traits, likes, and dislikes. Now, I do not experience this or know anyone who does, so if I say something or I get something wrong, I apologize in advance. But this is probably the closest thing we can really get to having a real-world equivalent to what is going on with Vanny and William, since there are now 2 personalities inside of Vanny, who each control their own behavior at different times, as we learn in the FNAF AR emails, where Vanessa will go from googling torture and how to induce compliance in human subjects to help and the migration pattern of bees in seemingly no time, literally searching up flowers one day and how far a human being can be cut in half before losing consciousness the next. This seems to be similar to how DID has been documented and described by those who live with it. I mean, I don't mean like the evil part, I mean the split part and the losing time part, at least from what I've read online, which is probably not perfectly accurate. So while these personalities aren't born from the same mind, they certainly share the same space. Both personalities though, while not having separate bodies, would be considered alive since they have DNA and experience cell division and replication, even if it's not all the time. So in that way, William is considered alive while present in Vanny's mind, but not alive as his coded form of glitch trap, or even if he ends up transferring his code into a robot at the end of Security Breach, as has been hinted at with the arm in the end of the gameplay trailer. There we have it, friends. Is William Afton alive? Yes and no. Glitch Trap and any future robot with this coded form is not alive, but while present and able to control Vanny or others, yes he is. Of course, this is all in a video game where every version of him is a code, so in our world, he isn't alive. At all, and hopefully never will be. Well, first of all, let's get this out of the way instantly. If FNAF was real, it would be horrible. Just straight up. 5 kids would have gone missing on one of their locations and the company probably would have closed down. But let's assume that people would still end up going, whether it's because they didn't believe the lies or thought that the government made it up, or because it's their choice, or because they're a YouTuber who wants views. Why are you looking at me like that? Well, assuming that people still went to the restaurant because perhaps maybe they vanished around the area instead of inside the place, what would it be like to live in a real Five Nights at Freddy's? For a kid, it would be pretty awful, but you also wouldn't know it. The world would be dangerous and anyone could be William Afton's next victim, but you wouldn't know that there was a serial killer on the loose with murderous animatronics able to disguise themselves and hide in plain sight that are willing to kill at any moment. But I mean, like, to be fair, that's also like real life, minus the animatronics. For adults, if you have kids, you may be worried. I mean, any parent is always worried about their kids, but if there was a group of kids who went missing in your area, I'm sure that there would at least be a small amount of paranoia. And honestly, it would be reasonable. I mean, I grew up in a house where my father was always worried. So much so that my sister couldn't walk up to her friend's house up the street without him watching to make sure she was okay. And while that would probably be extreme for most parents, if there was a very real threat of kidnapping, I'm sure that there would be a lot of curfews. For the sake of this entire thing, we also have to assume that the police didn't investigate the interiors of the animatronics themselves, despite them smelling like death and leaking body fluids, including blood. Since that's something literally anyone with common sense would check when investigating the disappearance of children and then learning that animatronics are leaking blood and smelling like a dead body. But what of the technology that we see in these games? Would animatronics that can alter their appearance be realistic? No. Of course not. The spring-locked suits, the illusion discs, the twisted animatronics, and the like are all extremely improbable considering the actual technology of not only our time, but the 80s when this would have normally taken place. At least, if we have a rough idea of the timeline, which honestly at this point, we could be totally wrong about the timeline. The technology in the games is so highly advanced that we have absolutely no idea what else they could have access to. They could have smartphones in the 80s for crying out loud. And if they don't, then William should have capitalized on that rather than murdering countless innocent kids, because he could have literally been a billionaire. The highly advanced technology would have to be disregarded in terms of the abilities of William Afton. So while this seems like a fight that nobody could really win, realistically, it wouldn't be as bad as we think, at least in those terms. Since even Chuck E. Cheese, the closest thing to Freddy Fazbear's in our world, obviously, still only has the most simple robotic abilities known to man, despite the popularity of Five Nights at Freddy's and their ability to capitalize on that trend by taking some of those concepts, like the advanced robotics, not the dead kids, and then converting them into real life. Because like the concepts in the actual pizzeria, not having kids go missing, like I said, that's a bad idea. Although based on comments left on previous videos, especially about how a real life Freddy's would happen, there have been plenty of people that are willing to die, or more likely, to go to Chuck E. Cheese if it was more dangerous for some reason. Y'all are weird. But one final query. How would YouTubers handle it? Clearly, there are YouTubers in this world thanks to the mention of MatPat, or at the very least Game Theory in the Fazbear Frights books. So, what of the others? Well, we would most likely not be talking about FNAF. Something that I'm sure a lot of you would enjoy, but also something that you wouldn't be aware of, which is a whole other can of worms that I won't be getting into today, because you wouldn't know about FNAF, because FNAF wouldn't be a thing. However, I'm sure that there would be plenty of true crime and conspiracy YouTubers heading to a or these same Freddy Fazbears where the kids went missing in order to solve the case. Or really just talk about it and get nowhere with it. Sounds like someone I know. Since they don't have the clearance or the equipment to do an actual investigation, or on a potentially closed case. Shane Dawson would 100% have gone there for that same conspiracy theory video, and the psychic twins would definitely have showed up at some point and definitely sensed something, but not quite known what it was. Ooh. MatPat may have made a food theory video about it because he made a food theory video about Chuck E. Cheese, but the thing is, these YouTubers coming to investigate, would they be William's next targets? It's an interesting question because as far as we know, he's only killed one adult, and that was Henry. Every other victim has been a kid, so while they may be in more danger, there would clearly be a bigger issue in trying to deal with these YouTubers, especially if they get killed or die mysteriously shortly after visiting a Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. It would probably start some form of curse rumor that would only get more people to go there to try to solve that case. But how would Freddy's have dealt with the pandemic? Would they have made enough to survive the years of quarantine? Or would they, like our Chuck E. Cheese, have to file for bankruptcy? Would they get to open their Pizzaplex? Or would some problematic tweets from William Afton rise and cause the restaurant to get cancelled for calling Chica a he? These are all good questions that we will never really have an answer for because, well, FNAF isn't real. And that's why people keep commenting that nothing in these videos is scary. No, it's not real. Can't actually hurt you. That's why it's not scary. Scary is subjective. Just relax.